Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. It's Monday morning and I'm beginning the week by doing one of these rather than sitting down and writing actual words on my ongoing novel, because I'm worn out after the weekend and it seems easier just to sit and talk to you lot. I hope you're all well and that your weekend was good, although by the time this arrives on YouTube it's probably going to be Wednesday or something. Anyway, we had a great weekend. I had all of Saturday with my art stall selling prints and cards in Inspire, the community centre here in Levenshulme, where there was the Levy Creators Fair with hordes of people stampeding into the place, buying stuff from all these different market stalls full of creative stuff that people had made, all kinds of stuff, from chili sauces to hand-thrown pottery to pictures and crocheted stuff and soaps. It was amazing. I've never really had a stall like that before. I've had that stall outside the house in the Jumble Trail, but never on a proper market. And it was really good. Loads of people knew my stuff, or my books, or my pictures. And a couple of people actually came and said they'd been watching these videos, which is amazing to meet some of my viewers in person. So that was all day Sunday, and we had a lovely dinner at Sips and Dips, which is one of our local restaurants, with our friends Erica and Nick. And then we all went to see Helen McCookery Book playing live at the Talleyrand at the end of Levenshulme High Street. And that's a lovely pub that's a great venue, and they do really small, perfect gigs there. And Helen's an amazing guitarist and singer-songwriter who I did a reading with about 7 years ago, a benefit gig, and we became friends then, and I followed her work since, and she's amazing. So that was Saturday, and it was really busy, and Sunday seemed to be busy as well, with Jeremy DJing again, and lots of painting yesterday, and a good chunk of reading and making a corned beef pie. So the weekend just went by in this blur of activity, and you can hear my voice is rough from shouting in noisy places and trying to hold conversations. We met amazing people, like new people, and lots of old friends came out to the Creators Fair as well. So it was a good weekend again. Anyway, today I'm still going through heaps of books that have kind of fallen off the shelf into piles when I've thought, oh, that's good, I'll talk about that one. And I've just noticed another one there. Maybe I'll talk about some books, shall I? This is a collection called Iron Women, from Iron Press in, I would say, 1990. Iron Press is based in the Northeast, and I was aware of them from being quite little, I think, quite young in starting out in writing. When I first started writing stuff that I wanted to send off, I became aware of this whole kind of small press activity all over the country, and of magazines like Stand and Panurge, things that you'd see in university libraries or at small press kind of gatherings. And I used to dip into these, and it seemed like a whole kind of separate world. I don't think I was ever really published by many, if any, early on. And there's less of this now. A lot of this kind of activity, of course, is online, and you don't get the same number of kind of nicely produced small press books with pastel end papers and this kind of very handmade feel. And I discovered writers who've kind of stayed in my head, and I've tried to collect since, like Daphne Glazer, who has a story in this called Love's Coming of Age. And she did a couple of short story collections. Dressing Up was one with a kind of Beryl Cook type cover, and a second one, the name of which I forget, but it had a title story that was about a municipal swimming pool. And on the front, it was all kind of green tiles and a rather large lady in a bathing suit and a bathing cap. And there was something about the way she wrote that just really appealed to my sense of humour. I must look up her collections and find them again. Love's Coming of Age by Daphne Glaser, I think must have been the first thing I read by her. And at the time she reminded me of people like, I suppose, Beryl Bainbridge and Sheena Mackay, but Northeastern. It had all started when Irene went to see Mrs. Harper, the clairvoyant, and she said, Mrs. Watkins, you're going to meet someone, a dark stranger, and it'll change your life. Irene studied her face in the mirror. After Mrs. Harper's prediction, she had had her hair bubble permed, so it covered her head in wild candy floss squiggles. She had become a blonde bombshell who wore blue or violet eyeshadow and whose lips were a scarlet gash. Well, she thought, I look like a paper bag that's been squeezed up and smoothed out again. Her eyes concertinaed, and cracks ran from her nostrils to her lips and down the sides of her mouth. She gave a careful smile, and she bared her sterident white teeth. Oh, it would have to do. It just would. Now she wondered what Andy was going to say to her. It was unusual for her son to have to issue a formal invitation to a mother. As she examined herself in front of her full-length wardrobe mirror, she enjoyed the sight of her navy blue stilettos and the blue and white spotted two-piece. She pinned a white carnation to her shoulder, a touch of luxury, the petals frilled against the shimmering blue and white silk. Life had fallen into before Mrs. Harper and after Mrs. Harper, two definite demarcations. Before Mrs. Harper, she had been Alf's widow, the mother of 4 sons, and that seemed to have been going on for a long time. And she'd also been dominated by the shadow of Alf. She had married him at 18, and he'd been 10 years older. He had spirited her way with his salesman talk. That really reminds me of when my big nana married again, just before I was born, I think the year before I was born. And she married a shifty man called Fred, who was the man from the Prue who came to the back door, apparently, to collect the divvy, to collect money for the insurance. And all my nana's kids, her 3 daughters and 1 son, didn't like Fred. He was a bald, shifty man who wore very shiny shoes. And my Auntie Julia apparently said the only reason Fred wears such shiny shoes is so he can see up Glad's dress when they're dancing together, when he takes her out. And so when I was born, he was a fixture. He was this troll-like being who terrified them all. And so as a toddler, I was aware of going to see my big nana, and it was in this gloomy house, dominated by this figure who sat on his chair, glaring at everyone. And I remember having all this washing. My nana had put all this washing, because I was staying with them, with my mum, on a kind of clothes horse in front of the fire. And he got into a rage and threw it all onto the flames. And then when I got teeth and can get around by myself, I got into the fridge at their house and nibbled my way around this huge round of cheddar that was only for Fred. Only he could have the Fred. And when my nana saw that, she was so scared of him that she pared round the edge with a knife to take away the teeth marks, to make it look untouched. And that's when my mum realised that she was terrified of him. Another time when we turned up there to visit, there was blood on all the antimacassars on the settee and the armchairs. And my mum thought there'd been a murder, but it wasn't. Glad had lashed back and apparently hit him with a pan. And then came the day we had to rescue her and hire a van and take her off to a council flat in 1974, and she did a moonlight flit and ran away from Fred the Troll forever. Anyway, I don't know if I should be telling all these stories. It's all a long time ago. Anyway, so that Daphne Glazer put me in mind of all of that. She's a lovely writer, and she deserves wider attention. She did some novels, I think, in the 2000s, early 2000s, and I think I read one of those, but I preferred the kind of the short, succinct slap of her short stories. Right, more things. This I almost got to talking about the other day, and I was waving it around in front of the camera, but didn't get to it. Something I dip into now and then because it makes me laugh. Communion by Whitley Strieber. I think it's pronounced Strieber. Maybe it's Stryber. This became a film, of course, and it's one of the great narratives of alien abduction, which always makes me laugh. I don't know why. The whole thing seems irresistibly funny. These people who are deadly serious about the adventures they apparently have, being dragged out of windows, pulled out of bed, beamed up to motherships, and then penetrated anally by aliens. I think they're all trying to tell us something that's not necessarily about aliens. That's my opinion. I definitely think there are aliens, but I don't think they're dragging people into space just to stick things up their bottoms. At least, as far as I know. There's a level of kind of seriousness and ominousness about the way Strieber writes in this that is hilarious. Before he wrote this, he wrote a novel called Cat Magic in the 90s, and then later on said that the supernatural elements in that were inspired, he realized, under hypnosis, I think, by his being abducted. And I remember Cat Magic, and I remember liking it as a teenager when I used to read huge, thick horror novels as a teenager. And then I was dead excited to find that it was, at least partially true, because I was completely credulous and believed that he'd been taken off to space. This all happened in the mid-80s, though. We were having a lovely Christmas at the cabin in late December 1985. You see, it felt like news when this came out, because it wasn't long after. Yeah, 87 when the book came out. On Christmas Eve, there was snow, which continued for 2 more days. My son had discovered to his delight that snow would fall in perfect crystalline flakes on his gloves if he stood with his hands out. So it's this lovely Christmassy atmosphere. And then the abductions start. And he reaches into his past and realizes that it's been happening to him all of his life. I remember reading this on a trip to America not long ago, about 2017, and kind of dipping into it rather than reading it concertedly in order. And wanting to read everything he'd written about this, because he's got quite a few volumes out of this. It belongs to a genre of not true crime, but kind of true life mysteries, like the Amityville books, which again are a whole thing in themselves, a whole world of nonsense in themselves, where it's bollocks, but it's really enjoyable bollocks. Or another favourite, the Moth Man book, which I must dig out and talk about. The Moth Man whole thing is really enjoyable. Terrible, I mean, really, because, it was a disaster, wasn't it? That's what the Mothman prophesized, and it came true. The bridge falling down in 60, whenever it was, 7, in Portland, Oregon. I forget. I think that's where it was. But the idea of these supernatural figures, whether aliens or Mothmen or whatever, being Harbingers of Doom. This is a lovely book that I think I've mentioned before, this recent kids book about mysteries. And I was just looking for a picture of their picture of the Mothman. There he is. I think these are the most lovely illustrations. Look at that Mothman. And there's something very sweet about making them into kind of cartoon characters, I think. In November 1966, in West Virginia, USA, Roger and Linda Scarberry and Steve and Mary Millette were driving home for a night out together. Suddenly, a 2-meter-high, moth-like creature with glowing red eyes began hovering over their car. Terrified, they drove faster and faster. But the weird winged being had no problem keeping up. It began hovering over their car. Eventually, the creature flew away. But the friends reported the incident to the police, and the story made the newspapers. It became clear that the two couples weren't alone. Plenty of people had seen this thing and were too embarrassed to mention it for fear of being laughed at. Over the next year, there were 100 more sightings. These continued until a dreadful accident happened in the area. A bridge collapsed, killing 46 people. After this, the creature was never seen again in West Virginia. However, the same Mothman, how do they know it was the same Mothman, was spotted around the world just before other disasters happened, nuclear accidents, outbreaks of disease, and even other bridge collapses. It's made people wonder, can the Mothman predict tragedy? If so, it's even more reason to be worried if you ever spot him. Which reminds me, I wrote a short story around the time of lockdown about a pangolin. At Christmas, being a harbinger of doom and COVID. It's a really sad story about, I think, Santa Claus telling the pangolin that he's going to be blamed for everything. I'd read a long piece in the New Yorker about pangolins and how shittily they are treated in being transported around the world and how they are tortured at dinner tables, and people drink their blood in certain countries. And the whole thing was just disgusting. And they make apparently very breathy, sighing noises, and that sound almost human, or they sound at least articulate. And when they got COVID, they sounded very wheezy. And somebody describes them all being in cages, wheezing. And for some reason, well, the obvious reason, that really upset me. Yes, defenselessness, really, in any form, whether it's to humans or animals or birds or whatever, really upsets me. Right, more novels. This is a novel I've had for over 30 years. Tony Warren, who created Coronation Street and walked away from that show, in the 90s, started writing novels, and they were glitzy sagas, from the Cobbles to Hollywood, those kind of sagas, like Barbara Taylor Bradford. And he set out on this career and wrote 4 of them. This is huge. A huge long novel about a thinly fictionalized version of Coronation Street. And Pat Phoenix, who was Tony Warren's great friend, who he put into Coronation Street and made a star. So this is his, it's not the whole story exactly as it was, but that's his springboard for The Lights of Manchester. And the story of Sorrel Starkey, this actress from Manchester. This is a bit of the prologue. You're now to pound in Manchester if the flower seller in St. Anne's Square doesn't nod as you pass. This morning he waved. Heads turned to look at the object of his interest, just as people will bend and peer to see who is inside a passing Rolls Royce. Sorrel Starkey didn't need this attention. She had not gone into show business to pass unnoticed. Manchester was welcome to stare as much as it liked, for Manchester had made her. Sorrel paused and looked at her own reflection in Mappin and Webb, the jeweller's window. Did it show? The happiness inside her was so new and so strong that she felt it should be shining out of her like a searchlight. Once in a lifetime, everybody should be allowed to feel like this. She felt in tune with the entire world, and her feet were on the pavements of the city she loved most on earth. Sorrel's reflection shone back at her. It was very difficult to put an age on it. Slim enough, elegant enough, and she'd been wise to let her hair go to ash blonde. The face was still all eyes, but it didn't shout too loudly of plastic surgeons. She looked what she was, a queen of television soap opera. With the sun still shining, light snow began to fall as she passed into King Street, Laura Ashley, and next. It could have been any prosperous shopping thoroughfare in England, except for the collapsible music stands on every corner. These are one of the hazards of Christmas shopping in Manchester, and one of its delights. Students from the colleges of music fill the air with carols, solitary oboists in door holes. Oboists in door holes sounds kind of obscene. Sorry. Brass ensembles outside the Royal Exchange. The chances are that some of the voices raised in song will end up in the great opera houses of the city. This was not, it seemed, one of the years when the police were willing to tolerate the musicians. Now, I'm not going to tell you a lot again. Move on. Don't be so mean, said Sorrel, who had not always been a famous lady in a £1,000 cashmere coat. She too had been ragged-arsed, but merry. She thrust a fiver into a tin can and smiled at the four musicians who looked like intelligent Hell's Angels carrying silver trumpets. Had been merry, had been. As some unseen hands switched on the Christmas lights, the snow sparkled past the coloured light bulbs. Sorrel stifled the urge to say, "You don't know it, but you are looking at the luckiest woman on earth." "I'm only doing my job, Letty," said the policeman anxiously to Sorrel as he pointed to the students of music. "I'm not Letty," the actress replied patiently. "Letty Bly is a character I've played for 28 long years on television. This is real life." "I'm sorry, Miss Starkey," said the policeman. Letty Bly or Sorrel Starkey, the wrath of either was famous. Not for nothing did her enemies call her Madam Manchester. I should stop there. I'm over time. I still have things I want to talk about. I want to talk about Little Me by Patrick Dennis and Gregory Maguire's Wicked, but another time. I'll be back again soon. I'm sorry for my eyes aren't actually functioning properly today, I don't think. I'm misreading things. This prescription isn't as good as it should be for reading glasses. I need to address that, I think. Right, I'm going to go. Please like and subscribe and check out Patreon and all my other YouTube videos. And I hope you had a good week. And I will talk again soon and see you again in the next episode. Goodbye.